After the great and terrible Second World War ended, the world hoped for peace. But a new kind of conflict was just beginning. This was the Cold War. It was a struggle between two very different ways of life. On one side was the United States and its allies, who believed in freedom and democracy. On the other side was the Soviet Union, a powerful communist country. They did not fight with armies and guns in a hot war. Instead, they fought with ideas, with money, and with fear. This new conflict would shape the world for many years to come, and its first major test would happen in a city that had already seen so much suffering: Berlin. Germany, the country that had started the war, was defeated and divided. The victorious powers, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, split the country into 4 zones. Each nation would manage its own zone, helping Germany to rebuild. The city of Berlin, Germany's capital, was also divided into 4 sectors. But there was a problem. Berlin was located deep inside the Soviet zone of East Germany. It was like a small island of Western democracy in a vast sea of communism. This unique situation created a point of tension, a place where the simmering distrust between the former allies could easily boil over into a crisis. For a few years this arrangement worked, but not without friction. In the western sectors of Berlin, life slowly started to return to normal. The United States, Britain, and France wanted to help Germany's economy recover. They introduced a new currency, the Deutsche Mark, to help stabilize the economy and encourage trade. This was a symbol of hope, a sign that a new prosperous Germany could rise from the ashes of the old one. The people in West Berlin could see the promise of a brighter future, one connected to the freedoms and opportunities of the Western world. They clung to this hope as a lifeline. The Soviet Union saw this move very differently. Their leader, Joseph Stalin, viewed the new currency as a threat. He believed a strong, unified, and democratic Germany was a danger to Soviet interests. He wanted to keep Germany weak and divided, ensuring that the Soviet Union would control all of Eastern Europe without challenge. The growing success of West Berlin was a constant, visible reminder of a world he could not control. He decided he had to do something drastic. He had to squeeze this island of freedom until it surrendered, and he chose to do it by cutting it off from the outside world completely. On June 24, 1948, the Soviet Union made its move. Under Stalin's orders, Soviet soldiers closed all the roads, all the train lines, and all the canals that led into West Berlin from West Germany. Suddenly, the city was cut off. No food could get in, no fuel could arrive, no medicine could be delivered. The Soviets had created a blockade. They believed that by starving the city, they could force the Western powers to give up their sectors. They wanted to absorb all of Berlin into their communist zone. For the 2 million people living in West Berlin, it was a terrifying moment. They had just survived a terrible war, and now they faced the threat of starvation. The blockade was a direct challenge to the United States and its allies. What could they do? Sending armed convoys to break through the roadblocks would be seen as an act of war. The world had just emerged from one global conflict, and nobody wanted to start another one, especially not a war that could involve atomic bombs. Abandoning West Berlin was also not an option. That would be a sign of weakness. It would tell the world that the United States would not stand up to Soviet aggression. It would be a betrayal of the 2 million Berliners who were counting on them for protection and for their very survival. The situation seemed impossible. The Western leaders were in a difficult position, caught between the risk of war and the certainty of a major political defeat. President Harry S. Truman of the United States met with his advisors. Some argued for a military response to push through the blockade by force. Others suggested a retreat to avoid a conflict at all costs. But a third option began to emerge, one that was bold, risky, and had never been tried on such a massive scale before. It was an idea born of desperation and ingenuity, a plan to fight back without firing a single shot. The idea was to supply the entire city from the air. The Allies still had legal rights to use the air corridors into Berlin. They would fly everything the city needed over the Soviet blockade. It was an enormous gamble. No one knew if it was even possible to keep 2 million people alive using only airplanes. It would require a level of organization and determination that was almost unimaginable. But it was their only peaceful option. They decided to try. They would turn to the sky to save the city on the ground. The Great Berlin Airlift was about to begin. The Berlin airlift, known as Operation Vittles, was an incredible sight to behold. It started slowly, but soon American and British planes were taking off and landing around the clock. At the height of the airlift, an aircraft was landing in Berlin almost every minute of every day. The skies over the city, once filled with the terrifying sounds of bombers, were now filled with the hopeful roar of cargo planes. These planes became a lifeline for West Berlin. They carried everything the city needed to survive. They brought tons of flour for bread, powdered milk for children, and potatoes for families. They delivered coal to keep the power plants running and the homes warm during the cold German winter. The pilots and ground crews worked tirelessly. Pilots flew multiple missions a day, often in difficult weather conditions. Flying through the narrow air corridors was dangerous, and the risk of accidents was always present. The ground crews were just as heroic. They had to load and unload the planes with incredible speed and precision to keep the operation moving. Men from the United States, Great Britain, and other allied nations worked side by side with German civilians on the ground. Former enemies were now partners in a common cause, working together to defy the Soviet blockade and keep the hope of freedom alive in the isolated city. The people of West Berlin showed incredible spirit and resilience. They faced shortages and uncertainty, but they refused to give in to Soviet pressure. They knew that every plane landing at Tempelhof, Gatow or Tegel Airport was a symbol of the free world's commitment to them. They gathered at the airfields to watch the planes come in, cheering for the pilots who were risking their lives to help them. This shared struggle created a powerful bond between the Berliners and the Allied airmen. It was a partnership based on a mutual desire for freedom and a refusal to be intimidated by the threat of totalitarianism. One pilot, an American named Gail Halvorson, became a special hero to the children of Berlin. He saw children watching the planes land, and he wanted to do something to bring them a little joy. He started tying small parachutes made from handkerchiefs to candy bars and dropping them from his plane as he approached the airport. Soon, other pilots joined in, and this small act of kindness became known as Operation Little Vittles. The candy bomber became a powerful symbol of the airlift's human side. It showed that this was not just a political or military operation. It was about people helping people. For nearly a year, the airlift continued. The Soviets had expected the Western powers to give up quickly. They thought the people of Berlin would lose hope and turn against their Western protectors. But they were wrong. The determination of the pilots, the resolve of the Berliners, and the sheer success of the airlift proved to be more powerful than any blockade. The operation delivered more than 2.3 million tons of supplies on over 278,000 flights. It was a logistical masterpiece, a stunning demonstration of what could be achieved through cooperation and peaceful resolve when freedom was on the line. Finally, on May 12, 1949, the Soviet Union admitted defeat. Stalin ordered the blockade to be lifted. The roads, railways and canals were opened once again. The people of West Berlin had won. They had endured the hardship and had not surrendered their freedom. The United States and its allies had also won. They had stood firm against Soviet aggression and had succeeded without going to war. The Berlin airlift was a clear victory, won not with bullets and bombs, but with flour, coal and candy. It was a victory for human decency and international cooperation. The Berlin airlift had a profound impact on the Cold War. It showed the world that the United States was committed to defending democracy, not just with military might, but with peaceful and humanitarian aid. It solidified the alliance between the Western powers and turned the people of West Germany from former enemies into firm friends and allies. The airlift drew a clear line in the sand, demonstrating that the expansion of communism would be met with strong and creative resistance. It was a defining moment that set the tone for the decades of struggle that would follow. In the end, the story of the Berlin airlift is a story about the power of human spirit. It is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, when powerful forces seem intent on crushing freedom, ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things by working together. The pilots who flew the planes, the crews who loaded them, and the citizens who waited for them all played a part in this remarkable chapter of history. They showed the world that hope can be delivered from the sky and that the most important victories are sometimes won without firing a single shot.